I have doubts. I have such doubt.
Doubting your faith and developing a spiritual strategy. That's the theme for this week's The Weekly Strategy Memo. I'm Rich Taffel, president of RLT Strategies, and each week I answer a question from a world-changing leader like you. And this week's question comes from Kansas. Rich, my question is on spiritual strategy. The gay issue has always been a big one for me. I was raised Catholic, got baptized as an adult at a Christian church. I have never agreed with the Christians' views on homosexuality, and it keeps me distant from my church. But then I feel like I'm choosing what to believe and what not to believe in the Bible, which makes me feel guilty. Admittedly, I have not studied the Bible, but Christians are always quoting the Bible for its intolerance of gays, and I completely disagree in my heart. Then I heard you say in one of your interviews that it's not and never was mentioned by Jesus as a sin. Is that correct? What's the discrepancy? How do I develop a spiritual strategy that brings together my faith and my core beliefs? I think the key to developing a great spiritual strategy for yourself is, like any strategy, know what your clear principles are. So let me start with a universal principle that I think is true in all world religions, and that is that we recognize we are all sort of created in the image of God, and we are very diverse. God must love diversity, because God has never created two people that are exactly the same. So I think that's a pretty basic principle you'll agree with. We are really different all over the world, and it's something to be celebrated. Point number one. The second principle, if you studied world religions, and I have done a bit of that, you'll find that there's a pretty core teaching in all world religions. In Christianity, it goes something like this. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, and that's loving God. That's it. The whole Bible. You said you haven't studied the Bible a lot. Well, if you just knew that one verse and you acted on it, you'd be acting on the entire Bible. That's the message. Love your neighbor. And it's a challenge because we are diverse. We actually like to separate ourselves by our race, our languages, our nationalities, our sexual orientations, our genders. We like to create division, and we like to hang around with people who are like ourselves. But the teachings of all great spiritual teachers ask us to break down those barriers. So the battle that is within you right now, between what your church is saying and what your heart is saying, I would pay closer attention to your heart. Sadly, organized religion around the world has often missed this core teaching, which is to love your neighbor. Instead, these organized groups have actually said, we're saved, you're not. We're better than you, you're worse. And this is the real shocker. You said you haven't studied the Bible. Well, I encourage you to read one of the four Gospels. When you do, I think you'll be very surprised. The Christianity that Jesus talks about, you won't find in much of organized churches in America. But what you will find is that he is challenging, you guessed it, organized religion of his time that was interested in rules. Who's right, who's wrong, who's in, who's out, who's clean, who's not clean. And Jesus breaks down all those barriers. So I think you'll be really at home with the teachings of Jesus when you study these passages for yourself and pay a little less attention to people interpreting Scripture for you. To your specific question about Jesus being mentioning homosexuality, the fact is he does not. And neither do the prophets. So this topic that has hardly come up at all in Scripture, maybe there's 7 verses in the entire Bible, is something that preoccupies much of world religions today. They're very obsessed with the difference between gay and straight. But just so you know, some of them are still battling about male and female, and some are saying that men are better than women. That's a pretty old battle, but they're still fighting in organized religion. And 100 years ago, they were fighting it on race. In the United States, most churches split over the slavery issue. Many Christian churches defending slavery. So the sad truth about organized religion, and Christianity specifically, is it's often been on the wrong side of history. While there have been spiritual leaders like Dr. King who have led movements, he was opposed by much of organized religion. That's just a fact. So I think your heart is leading you in the right place, and that's a great spiritual strategy. And I think you might find that you're very aligned to the teachings of Jesus if you actually took time to read them and, instead of having them interpreted by somebody else. I encourage you to have doubt, to question it, because only real belief comes from when you question things and make them your own. So don't trust what I say and don't trust what the church says, but read the scriptures and open yourself up through prayer, and I think you'll be surprised that you might be onto something and God might be trying to tell you something. Thanks for watching.